So now we will go on to 9.0 informational reports and discussion items. First up, 9.1 is the Facilities Planning Steering Committee update. Brian, I believe you had a brief, and I have something as well. So
yeah, sure. I think this evening we're going to look forward to hearing an update from the Facilities Planning Steering Committee. Leading the presentation is Josie Plott from the CSU Institute for the Built Environment. I want to welcome Josie. I believe she's joined by Jesse Morrill, Micah Nielsen, Amy Hoseth, and Rebecca Everett. I want to say welcome and thank you again for your collective efforts.
thank you so much. And I just wanted to do an introduction and thank you as well. One of the things that I want to start off with was going back to the why. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? We are seeing declining enrollment. We are seeing fewer dollars as a result of that. We have been working with legislators to try and get more money, but it is pie and it is finite. And even the legislators, as of last night, were instructed to cut $150 million from their budget. So this is not something that we are, able to walk in and say, hey, if you just gave us more money, it would solve the problem. And they go, oh, why didn't you ask? And we can give it to you. So this is an actual, a struggle that PSD has been facing for quite some time. And so we as a board went and we tasked Bruder School District and therefore Superintendent Kingsley to come up with some solution to this and to figure out how we can best go ahead and save money that is needed and have it be best for students. So that's what we have tasked the superintendent and cabinet and PSD as a whole to do, and which you, I gratefully have stepped up to help in the work, and I appreciate that so much. This is hard. This is probably some of the hardest work that we have ever had to do here at PSD. I am venturing to guess it's probably some of the hardest work you've all have ever had to do. And so I want to thank those of you who are sitting on the committee, who have been here for 5 meetings now. And when we say meetings, we don't mean 2-hour meetings. We mean all-day meetings going into the evening meetings. I want to thank those who even just applied and said, I am willing to put myself into this position. And you weren't selected. I appreciate the fact that you were willing to step into the arena. And that is something that I want to acknowledge. What we're doing here, what you're doing here, is for the greater good. It is for PSD as a whole and for our students. And I know you know that, but I want you to know that we see that as a board, we see that as a district, and we see that as a collective here. And we want to make sure that the community sees that as well. That said, we all know that this is an emotional topic, right? We are going to find something owie in all of this. And I want to encourage people to say ouch when there's something there that needs to be said. And we can do that in a kind way. We can do that with humanity at the center. We can do that by acknowledging that we are all people first. We are all going to have these emotions that, oh, they named my school. They didn't name my school. This is going to happen. This isn't going to happen. And that's okay. We can all accept that we're going to have those emotions, and we can be kind about that. And so I just want to commit to you all as a board, as a cabinet, and to the community, that we are here to seek to understand. We are here, we're going to give grace, and we are going to be kind to one another. And we hope that the community and everybody will join us in that. So this is the first of 3 presentations that you'll be giving to us. We encourage the community to give feedback. You're going to start tomorrow night with some feedback sessions, or tomorrow morning, right? Tomorrow morning, my mistake, for some feedback sessions. Please, if you haven't already, plan to go ahead to at least one of the 3 feedbacks, one of the 5 feedbacks, 5 feedback sessions, I think, or 6. Now it's 6, right? Okay. Is it 7? Okay, we keep adding one. It's great. So go to one of those sessions, come to one of the board listening sessions, and we have 2 board listening sessions, one on April 16th, one on June 4th, and just to let you know that the board for tonight, we are going to listen. We are going to try and figure out in our minds what you are presenting, trying to synthesize that, trying to do that, and then hopefully with some input from tomorrow morning sessions and the 6th thereafter, some input from us, some discussion that you will see in public, that the board will make a final decision come June. But I just want you all to know that we are listening. We understand the difficulty of the problem that we have presented to you. And we want to thank you so much for stepping up to try and solve that problem, to create vibrant schools and to fit PSD values in here to the best of our abilities. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that opening, Dr. Draper. I really appreciate it. As we get started, I'd like to introduce myself to the board as well as to the community and the members of the listening public that are joining us this evening. I'm Josie Plout. I am a Fort Collins native, Irish Lincoln Pooter. My daughter went through the Pooter school system as well. Dunn, Lincoln, Pooter, GA, the online one, and then and she was not one of the students who shook the superintendent's hand, but she's lovely and she's doing great and she's living her life in her way. So, but just so you know that I am part of this community, I'm deeply committed to this community, and I've worked at CSU Institute for the Built Environment for the past 20 years, helping to support this school district, our city government, our county, and many private entities and beyond in bringing research to practice, helping groups of people work through both exciting work together and sometimes really challenging work, working on issues like permanent supportive housing and working on transportation and housing and affordability and new development. So not shy about difficult and challenging and topics that bring people together with diverse perspectives. So I'm honored to be working with my community in this way, and like you, I appreciate the time and effort that has gone into this, the care and the support that we've received from the from staff and from the community members who've been present, and we hope to share with you tonight a little bit about the work that we've done so far. So with that, I think I will jump into the presentation. All right, we're going to move through tonight a little bit of framing I want to share with the board and with the community, a brief overview of the context that the steering committee has been working with, and then Rebecca is going to share with us tonight a bit of an overview about the committee and the guiding principles that were provided by the board to work with within that committee. And then we'll talk a little bit, Jesse will talk about the scenario development process, so how we've gotten to the scenarios that we're going to be presenting this evening. We will be presenting 3 scenarios this evening. I want to say this coming into the conversation, and we'll say it multiple times throughout. These scenarios are meant as a point to begin a conversation. They are not the likely scenarios that we will be presenting to you in May when we come forward with recommendations. They are here for the purpose of opening conversation and sharing some diverse ways or some different ways of looking at what potential scenarios might look like. So I want that to be sort of clearly understood. I don't think that anyone on the committee feels like we've arrived and that we're presenting scenarios to the community that now we're just going to try to look for some kind of path through. We're authentically looking for the community, including all of our parents, teachers, staff, and community at large to give input on these ideas and help us craft the best possible solutions. One thing that's also worth saying is that this is the definition of a wicked problem. I like to work on problems that have beautiful win-win solutions and where we can find creativity to find our way through. This seems like a wicked problem where there's probably not a single solution set that causes no discomfort for anyone in our community. So I just want to acknowledge that. I also wanted to say that tonight's meeting is being recorded. It will be sort of edited and made more sort of palatable, if you will. It won't be so long. And that will be made available to the community so that people can watch that before taking the community questionnaire that we've developed and we'll be sharing with you. There's also, during the listening sessions, those will not be recorded and they will not be live streamed. So we just wanted to be clear that the one recording of this presentation will happen this evening, and that all content that will be presented at the listening sessions will be the same content that's presented tonight. It will be a condensed version, so it won't have quite as much detail at the listening sessions, but all listening sessions will be the same. All of the, and it will be basically the same content that we're presenting this evening. So we thought it was important to clarify that for the community. Okay, so framing the conversation, Director Draper, as you mentioned, this is difficult work. It's also important work for our community. We need to be able to move through difficult decisions and continue to maintain the financial health of our schools and our school districts so that we can provide the highest possible education opportunities for our children, for their education and for our community. And we understand that everyone who is investing time in being here tonight, in listening to this conversation, in coming to the listening sessions, that if we don't share anything else, we do share a love and care for our children and their education. And that is a really important common ground to begin from, and to be kind to one another in the conversation, knowing that it is difficult. So thank you for framing that. As has been mentioned many times, the reason for consolidating schools is really twofold. There is declining enrollment happening at PSD and across our state and our nation. That's showing up here in 2,200 seniors this year and only 1,600 kindergartners. So we can see evidence of declining enrollment through our class sizes. The most recent count is that there are 256 students less in Poudre School District this year than there were last year, and there's an anticipated 9.25% decline over the coming few years, so it's not a long period of time. There's also an important geographic shift, so where students live within the district is changing. We're seeing growth in the Timnath and Wellington areas in particular, and we see declining enrollment on the west side of Fort Collins. Again, I know some of this is review, but I just want to make sure that we're all starting with the same framing. Empty seats in the district are largely due to this trend where people are having fewer children. And the graph here is showing the decline in birth rates over the last several decades. People in this country and many other countries simply aren't having as many children. So even with immigration, we're seeing overall fewer school-aged children in our schools. So I think one of the big questions within the community is that we feel the growth. And I have worked with Rebecca previously in her work at the City of Fort Collins and now at Larimer County in planning and development. And we know the community is growing. It's obvious, we all feel it. When I was born here, I think the population was less than half of what it is today. And it's happening now with older folks. So people are moving here and they're not coming with families and school-aged children. So yes, the population is growing, but it really matters what age demographic those residents are. Second, it's not happening equally across the district. So we're experiencing high growth in the Wellington and Timnath areas where you see in orange, that's largely to the east of the interstate and north, where we don't have a lot of infrastructure or many schools. And then we're seeing declining enrollment on my side of town, but I'm not taking it personally. So we're seeing declining enrollment on the west side of town, where there are older, more established neighborhoods. We don't see as much new construction happening in those areas. There are some small infill projects, a lot happening around CSU, but again, those are school-aged folks, not families with children. So there are some challenges with moving boundaries to adjust the changing demographics of where school-age kids are living. We can't just bring everybody from Timnath over to this side of town. That ends up being impractical, and I think many families expect that they're going to be able to go to school close to where they live. So just wanted to emphasize that we've been looking at and trying to understand the realities of what it means to try to balance enrollment across a geography where people are living is changing. So, school budgets, and again, I know this is kind of basics, but I want to make sure that the entire community is starting from the same baseline information, or at least knows what baseline information the steering committee has been working from. So school budgets are primarily based on the number of children who are enrolled at each school. And when you're running a school that is less than half enrolled, it becomes difficult financially, and ultimately it's unsustainable to run partially full schools. And the more and more schools that we're running that are at that partial capacity, it makes the budgeting process simply unsustainable. So as enrollment numbers go down at schools, the cost to operate those schools does not go down in step with the amount that the funding goes down. So that's the source of the issue. I think it's also important to ask the question of what happens if we don't take action. So without the financial efficiencies involved with consolidating schools so that we have fewer, fuller schools, what happens is that the school district will still need to make the same budgetary cuts because, as you said, there's not more money to go around. Even though the district has been looking for other sources and securing other sources of funding, they're not reliable sources of funding. And so the changes in staffing will need to be made either way, and they will likely be more severe if action isn't taken around school consolidations. So that means that we're starting to really dig into having schools with all the specials, with all the support staff that they might like to have and that I think our families expect to have. Benefits, fuller schools are better able to provide staff and resources to support positive outcomes for students. Optimizing enrollment helps ensure the financial district of the district overall. So there's the health of individual schools as well as the health of the district as a whole working body. And school consolidations open space for early childhood learning centers, which is something that is we have a need for in our community, as well as improved facilities for integrative service programs and other beneficial uses. So these buildings can be used beneficially to accommodate and absorb needs that we have within our community already, especially around early childhood education and serving our integrated services, families and students better. What else is PSD doing to save money? School and central budgets are already being reduced, and that has an impact on the number of staff across PSD and reductions there, which we all know is undesirable and a painful process, but it's something that's already a reality within the district. And the district has also, on the positive side, pursued grant funding in the total of millions of dollars. It's been a meaningful addition, but those are not reliable dollars that we can count on to operate the schools on a day in and day out basis. For those who are interested in learning more about PSD's budgeting process, enrollment numbers, all of this, the finance and budget section of the website, as well as the long-range planning website, all have deeper dives into information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk a little bit about the committee charge.
Great, thank you, Josie. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Everett. I am a proud parent of a Putnam Panther and a 20-year resident of Fort Collins. And I really appreciate the opportunity to serve on the committee alongside some really amazing committee members. As has been alluded to, it is hard work and it is meaningful, and it is something that we all care deeply about. The committee is really charged with supporting you all in your decision making. Our job is to identify scenarios, recommendations that relate to possible school consolidation, boundary adjustments, as well as placement of educational programming that may result from some of those changes. We were instructed to start with a clean slate as compared to what may have been presented last fall. And that clean slate has then been built upon using data, equity considerations. Soon we will have community feedback to add to the mix, as well as our own understanding of the system and the issues that we see in different parts of the district. The committee is charged primarily with focusing on short-term challenges and solutions. not necessarily solutions that may benefit the district longer term. And we recognize the immediacy of the need to identify solutions that can be implemented for the 2025 school year. Fundamentally, we understand our role to be to provide deep thinking and analysis and support for sound decision making, and we take that seriously. The committee consists of 37 members. About half, or approaching half, are district staff, be they teachers, administrators, classified staff, or district level staff, as well as 14 parent representatives and 2 community members at large. There's representation from every feeder system, as well as parents at the elementary, middle, and high school level, and representing our alternative schools as well. There was an application process to be selected, and I can speak from my experience spending over 24 hours with the members of this committee so far, with a lot more still to come. That this is a group that is really thoughtful, really dedicated to the success of the district as a whole, and really good at seeing and recognizing our own biases, our own fears and concerns, acknowledging when feelings are coming up, because it is really hard to see your school's name listed or called out. I really have so much appreciation for everyone who has committed this time to serve, and know that there's still more to come. Briefly mentioning the roles that various groups are playing, I want to start with a mention of the staff that are supporting the committee's work, and just express my gratitude for Lauren and Dave and the other staff who have spent time with us, helping to educate us, build our understanding of programming, of the different services the district provides, of the integrated nature of how schools relate to one another, and doing a lot of work in between meetings alongside Josie and her team at IBE to make sure that we have good information and we are set up for success as well. The role of staff really is to support the committee and give us the data that we ask for, which they've been very, very generous with, helping to share perspectives, but not directing our work. They are there as resources and not influencing the committee. The board, as you all know, are the ultimate decision maker on any changes to the boundaries, to school consolidations, and will listen, we hope, to the recommendations of the committee, as well as to what you hear from the community in response to the scenarios that are presented. Finally, there are 4 committee liaisons. So Jesse, myself, Amy Hoseth, and Micah Nielsen were nominated by peers within the committee to speak on behalf of the committee, though any of the committee members, I'm sure, could represent the work well at this point. There is a website for community members who are interested in learning more about the work, having access to a lot of the data that we are using in our work sessions, and the QR code and the website are up there for anyone who'd like to learn more. All right, next I'm going to remind you all of some of the guiding principles that you have established for this committee, and to communicate out to those who may be watching. And I won't read all of the guiding principles, but they are available online. This is the abbreviated version here that really has been our guidepost as the committee has been entering these conversations. So these guiding principles were established back in January to communicate direction to the committee before we organized. And in summary, the goals of this committee are to optimize enrollment across schools, including through consolidations, continuing access to and continuity for educational programming. Choice is very desirable within our district. Consider the cost of operating facilities, capital needs, and how those costs extend into the future, as well as easing enrollment pressures on the east side of town where we're experiencing a lot of the growth that Josie has mentioned. We have also been working to embed equity in our process as a committee and in the recommendations that we eventually make, including the scenarios that we're presenting tonight. And that's reflected both in PSD's commitment to equity as well as some equity guidelines that the committee ourselves have generated and worked on together. The committee's equity guidelines were developed through researching other communities and how they have approached school consolidations, bringing the expertise from committee members who do a lot of work related to equitable processes and outcomes. And I will read these because I think that they're important just to mention. So our equity guidelines for the committee's work are ensuring equitable access to engagement, and the committee has shaped how the listening sessions are organized, recommendations for additional listening sessions and the types of listening sessions that might be helpful. Equity impact analysis will be important as we start to evaluate scenarios. It's important that consolidations are not based on school performance because we know that performance does not always reflect quality. Making demographics explicit that's been a major focus of the conversations of the committee, as well as minimizing disruption to at-risk students. And at-risk can be defined in many different ways. Protecting and continuing English language development education, and protecting and continuing to provide free and appropriate public education as important charges of the district. So we hope that you all and the community will see some of these principles reflected, if not, in the initial scenarios as we work to come together around some final scenarios for recommendation. All right, so now I'm going to hand this over to Jesse Morrill, who will present more information on how we developed the scenarios tonight.
All right, thank you. So my name is Jesse Morrill. I'm currently the principal at Timnath Middle High School, and I'm also a product of PSD. So I went to Bolts Middle School and Fort Collins High School, and I have 3 daughters, one who just graduated from our district and 2 more in middle and high school. So obviously, like everybody on the committee and everybody here in the room, care a lot about the future of our district and the direction that we're going. So we're going to talk about the scenarios now, which one thing just we really want to reiterate, and there's going to be another slide on this to fully reiterate it, but these are draft scenarios, so they are not in final form, as Josie talked about earlier. And this step in the process is really important in terms of gathering that community input. And so that's going to be really, really valuable and really helpful as we go through the listening sessions and get the online feedback through the form. And that will help guide future iterations of the scenarios as we move closer to the May deadline. They were developed again by the steering committee with support from Flow Analytics, our district staff, and IBE, but the committee really doing the work of coming up with the ideas. The committee felt it was very important to present multiple options, and especially at this part of the process, to not like have just a scenario and then just a little tweak for a second scenario, but really give some different options to look at so that we could really explore some different creative solutions to kind of what we're trying to hit with our goals. So you're going to see that as we look at the actual scenarios that are built out tonight. And again, the community will continue to help us inform where we go moving forward. The exploration process involved.
Jesse, might I? One
Yeah.
tiny thing.
Yeah.
So on the back slide, there's one sentence on the bottom that I want to make sure gets read. Can you go back one?
Yes.
Okay, the caveat there, the fine print, is not all schools that are currently in scenarios will be affected, and some schools that are not currently shown on the scenarios may be suggested in future scenarios. So just to understand, what you're going to see is not a definitive list of who's on the table and who isn't. The committee really chose to present a variety without narrowing it to a few schools too quickly. But I think it's just really important that the board and everyone in the community understand that just because you see a name tonight, it doesn't necessarily correlate to seeing a name in May when we come back together.
Great,
Sorry,
thank you.
Jesse,
No,
thanks.
thank you. Thank you for adding that. All right, so as far as the exploration process, again, the committee, we kind of started with a lot of what ifs, coming up with some different, like, what if we did this, what if we tried this, and sending a lot of different ideas to Flow to send back data on, here's what would happen if you made this move or tried this scenario or this option. There were, I think, approaching 150 or so ideas that kind of have been put into the room, and some of the ideas, as we've gone through, have simply just not worked. When we run the data, it makes a school way too full, or a school way too small, or does something where it's just too far in terms of where we're trying to bus students from their homes to a school. Some ideas certainly worked better than others, and some of the things we're going to share tonight at least seem to work mathematically in terms of students being able to fit in schools and helps us with the efficiency issues that we're trying to address. And as we got into it again, as has been talked about, this is really, really complicated work. And there's so much more to it than the math. There's so much more to consider as we're trying to come up with scenarios that feel healthy, feel like good moves for our district, and to help keep our district strong. Some of these variables that have been reviewed, I'm not going to read all of these bullet points, but you can get a sense for the different types of data that our committee has been reviewing. And most of these, if not all of this data, is available on the district website, and so in forms of graphs and charts and spreadsheets where you can find this information online, anywhere from considering the buildings themselves, how big they are, how many students they can accommodate, how new they are, do they have air conditioning or not. What does the McKinstry report tell us about future needs for those buildings, to current enrollment data, future enrollment projections, wait lists that are currently at schools, transfer in, transfer out rates. We've really looked at a lot of different factors as we've considered options that might be effective. Okay, now Josie talked a little bit about school budget, and really one of the target areas that we're focused on with this work is the size factor adjustments. And so, this graph is just showing the elementary schools across our district and where they're at in terms of enrollment. And you can see that as elementary schools get under 400 students, the student-based budgeting model starts to break down. And that's where we just going based off student-based budgeting, you're not able to run a school that includes all of your specials, your PE, your art, your music, that has all of the staff that you need to just run a school. Whether you're a big school or a small school, there's a certain number of staff that are needed to just make a school operate. And so as you get below 400 at an elementary school or 700 at a secondary school, that's where the student-based budgeting model starts to break down. So that is a key piece that we're trying to address. Right now, PSD supplements schools to the tune of about $6.6 million per year because of schools being smaller than those benchmarks. And so then they need extra funding to be able to run and maintain the robust programming that we currently have. And again, if we get more efficient in terms of our building capacity and enrollments, then we can start to bring that number down, and that will help us be more efficient financially as a district. Some other key terms here as we talk about capacity and building utilization. There's a couple different formulas that are being looked at. One is called the room index capacity, and that is simply the number of teaching spaces that exist in a building times the number of students that you can fit in each of those teaching spaces. So for elementary schools, that number is 25 students per teaching space. For middle and high schools, secondary schools, it's 30 per teaching space. And so that's if you're using all your teaching spaces and filling them with students all day long at that rate, that's kind of like your maximum possible capacity. We don't generally really run schools at the room index capacity because teaching spaces are used for different purposes. And so we talk about the number that we're really utilizing is called the national standard capacity. And this applies a percentage to the room index capacity that really reflects more how schools are really utilized and gives us a number that's more accurate in terms of an actual capacity for running a school. So for elementary schools, we take 80% of the room index capacity to get the national standard. For middle schools, it's 75%. For high schools, it's 85%. For middle high schools, it's 80%. And so that's how we've modeled that when you look at those, that information on the spreadsheets that have been provided. All right, so again, back to financials. The scenarios are really striving to reduce the size factor in the student-based budgeting model. That's a targeted area that we're going for to try and, again, make us more efficient in terms of how we're using our dollars in PSD. We also know, though, that there are additional savings beyond just the size factor. So you're going to see some estimates on what we're saving on the size factor tonight, but we know that there are more additional savings if you consolidate a school that are beyond just the size factor, such as knowing that if you consolidate a school, one school with another school, you need one principal for that school now and not two. You need maybe less custodial staff. If we're utilizing a building in a different way, those buildings can be maintained differently based on the types of usage and might even be deprioritized in terms of things like air conditioning and that sort of thing. So even schools that we're considering for consolidation that would be repurposed, might be maintained differently and would cost us less in the long run. So there's more savings in there than just the size factor. Okay, we're going to talk about some things that were not included in the current scenarios that we thought might be wonderings already from people that thought maybe these would be things that we would be looking at. So one of the, some of the schools include the mountain schools. These were schools that are, when you look at capacity and where they're at in terms of utilization, they are on the low side. However, these schools serve as community centers in their smaller communities. There are large travel times. There's a huge area that the mountain schools cover, and there are big travel times for students to get to school already with what currently exists in terms of the mountain schools. When you look at consolidating one, it increases some of those travel times pretty significantly to the point where we felt like it was challenging to consider that as a viable option. The PSD district boundary extends all the way to the Wyoming border. We have a really big boundary. And so this was just an area that felt very difficult to make a move on, even though it was modeled a couple of times. We will continue to monitor these schools for declines in enrollment, and there's some consideration of maybe some technology-related supports moving forward as more options for remote learning can be considered. But right now, it didn't feel like that was the place to consolidate. Another area that we did not include at this point in the scenarios are the creation of K-8 schools. There are some places where mathematically it looks like the students could fit into a school like a middle school and you could turn it into a K-8, and there's some things that maybe make some sense there. But it's a pretty significant move, really, really big boundary changes that have to happen to align all of those boundaries to one K-8 that feeds into itself. Potential for renovation needs, where if we're going to take a middle school and convert it to a K-8, we have to do some things to that building to make it work for elementary students. Things that we thought about were like bathrooms and playgrounds, furniture. There are going to be different things that we'd have to do to buildings to make that happen. We also know that there's a big difference between elementary even licensure and the way that elementary schools run and secondary schools. And so even thinking about principalships and leadership in a K-8, there's a lot to think about there. So I think in general, we felt like this was something where it would warrant further study, further like, let's decide whether K-8s are something that we want to pursue from an educational standpoint. And that would help us determine whether these were good solutions or not, but they're not currently in the scenarios. Doesn't mean that couldn't be something that changes, but right now that's why they're not in there. Okay, and then also, there are no changes included to Wellington Middle High School right now, or the Wellington area. While there is growth in Wellington, and certainly it's an area that is adding students, at this point, the projections for Wellington Middle High School have them staying within the building capacity for the next several years. And so we didn't make Wellington, the Wellington boundary, a priority in terms of our scenarios. Okay, so we're going to get into the actual scenarios here. And as we go through them, you're going to see that we work from east to west with each of the scenarios. So you can see, again, Josie pointed out kind of the different parts of the district, the east side being, the schools just west of I-25, and then obviously east of I-25 in the Timnath area. We've got a central area that's identified here on the map, and then we've got the west area where we're seeing the most declining enrollment. And so you'll see our scenarios mapped out by area. Okay, some other things that are considered in the scenarios are our alternative schools and our integrated services programs that need space. So that includes schools like Centennial, PCA, our transition pathways programs to support students ages 18 to 21, and a transition program to help them move from high school to their adult life. And then also Polaris and PGA, Poudre Global Academy, schools that are currently on zero-based budgeting. Again, those schools are more expensive right now than student-based budgeting schools. And so those are schools that all need spaces and potentially can have opportunities to be more efficient with funding.
Jesse, I'm sorry, could you define zero-based budgeting for the people who are watching and don't understand?
Yeah,
this?
maybe, Dave, do you want to define zero-based budgeting? You might be better at defining that.
So zero-based budgeting is something that we started doing through COVID, where we actually pull the schools in, build staffing plans from the ground up. So we don't start with a budget number. We start with what the minimum necessary for that program is, and that's where the zero-based idea comes from.
Can I ask, Dave, can you clarify why some schools would be funded on an SBB model and some would be funded on a zero-based budgeting model, just for the public in terms of what schools are under that umbrella?
Yeah, sure. So let me pull it up here real quick so I can make sure I get them all. So the schools that are on the zero-based model are the mountain schools, and so those are schools that we basically have a minimum program that we have to provide there. The good example there is that my understanding is that it's hard for a teacher to teach more than 2 grades, so that creates that minimum there. Other schools that are on zero base are Poudre Global Academy. Just the way that program is structured, it's a zero-based school. The SBB model doesn't fit it. Same thing with Centennial and PCA. Those were also schools that even when we went to student-based budgeting like 18 years ago, that alternative programs didn't fit in the model because they just cost more. And so we've been looking at those costs. I think that's it. Oh, Polaris is the last one that's a zero-based school. And Polaris, also the way the program has been structured is why we zero-base it. It has in the past been on a student-based model in the past, so there's some exploration there.
All right, thank you. Okay, so before we talk about the first scenario, one more reminder. These are draft scenarios. And it is really important, again, to remember that. And the community will help us inform how the committee moves forward as we develop future scenarios, recommendations to the board. As Josie talked about, not all schools that are currently in the scenario will be affected, and some schools that are not in the current scenarios may be suggested in future scenarios. And so there's nothing final about what we're looking at, but these are simply ideas, things that have been modeled and considered. We're also not choosing between scenarios at this time, and I think that's important also. And we might even, as you look at these, you see opportunities where there's some like interchangeable parts. You know, you could do this thing for the east, and you could do a different thing for the east while still doing the same thing for the west, or doing something different for the west. So so there's a possibility that we might find something we like in one scenario and stick with it and change other things based on other things that are modeled. I think as we go through this, we'd like to present all the scenarios and then open it up to questions. So there's a lot of information, but if we can kind of just get through all the scenarios, then we'll open it up and answer any questions that you have. Okay, so here's the first one, scenario A1, okay? Again, we start at the top of the slide, which is the east side of the school district. The first move here says to balance enrollments at Timnath, Bethke, and Bamford elementary schools by adjusting boundaries between these schools. And that's essentially taking a part of the kind of the southern part of the Bethke boundary, moving it to Bamford, and taking maybe the southern part of the Timnath elementary boundary and moving it to Bethke, with the goal there being to alleviate pressure on Timnath Elementary and put more students into Bamford Elementary. So that's kind of the move there. And I think you see that in most of these scenarios. That's kind of just a boundary move that seems to make sense right now. The next move on the east then is to adjust Bamford's feeder so that the students, the families that are in the Bamford feeder would then attend Preston Middle School and Fossil Ridge High School instead of Timnath Middle High School. And so that would alleviate some of the enrollment pressure at Timnath Middle High School and divert those students to Preston and Fossil Ridge and help make those schools capacity higher as well. So that's the east on A1. When we move to the west, consolidating Blevins Middle School. So students at Blevins Middle School would be spread between Lincoln, Weber, and Bolts Middle Schools. So that boundary would be divided up between those three, and Blevins Middle School would consolidate. Consolidating Beatty and Olander elementary schools, and those students would consolidate into Bennett, Johnson, Lopez, and Bowder elementary schools. You'll notice that there's that group of schools. There are multiple options that could be considered within that group. And so there's multiple ways to model that within any two of those schools could be considered. That's the one that was modeled here in A1. Also on the west, farther west, consolidating CLP Elementary School into Tavelli, Irish, and Putnam Elementary Schools, and consolidating CLP Middle School into Lincoln Middle School. So both CLP Elementary and CLP Middle School consolidated and moved further east. The last three rows are ideas for the alternative programs and where they could land in this scenario. We have Poudre Community Academy and Centennial High School moving to the Blevins Middle School building and combining those programs into one school. We have Polaris Expeditionary Learning School remaining in its current building and making attempts to move them to a student-based budgeting model from zero-based. And then our transition programs could move to the Centennial building. And that is A1. Some things to consider. So benefits for A1. It does alleviate enrollment pressures on the East Side Elementaries and Timnath Middle High School. It increases enrollment at currently underutilized elementary, middle, and high schools. It does create space for early childhood and other programming with some of the buildings that could be repurposed. It improves financial viability of zero-based budget for alternative and choice programs. It provides PCA with a gym and better public transportation access at the Blevins building. The savings are modeled at about 33% of the current size factor adjustment, so between 2.1 and 2.3 million per year. And it improves facilities and access to CSU and employment centers for the transition program students. Some things to consider within this scenario. This does create longer transportation times, especially for students who attend CLP middle and elementary schools currently. And some of the CLP middle school students already travel from as far as the Wyoming border, so they already have a long travel time. You're adding another 10 to 12 minutes or so beyond where they're at. This does not facilitate a shift away from zero-based budgeting for Centennial and PCA, and it does not facilitate a shift to student-based.
I think that's a mistake,
Okay.
actually.
If they combine into one
If they combine
program,
them,
potentially you
that
could
does
shift away from
facilitate
that.
them in that direction.
Correct.
Do we need to say that more clearly?
So I think if we, as we're saying, that's listed here, but potentially if we combine those two current schools into one program at Blevins, there could be more students there, which could allow us to move away from zero-based budgeting to student-based budgeting. So that one, we should probably take off of there. Also, this does not facilitate a shift to student-based budgeting for PGA. Okay?
Is it possible for you to go back to the previous slide just for a minute?
Yes. Okay, you bet. Okay, scenario A2, it has just one variant from A1. And so this one, same thing as A1, all things are the same except for, in this scenario, CLP elementary and CLP middle schools would become expeditionary learning schools, leaving the neighborhood boundaries in place and moving Polaris Expeditionary Learning School to the CLP campuses, combining them to make a K-12 campus with elementary students attending the CLPE using that building, and grades 6 through 12 using the CLP middle school building. So that's a difference just in how the CLP buildings would be utilized. Benefits here, it does expand access to the expeditionary learning model. It's also a really great campus for the expeditionary learning model. It does save money. It does not save as much as A1, but it saves about 25% of the size factor adjustment, 1.6 to 1.8 million per year. Some additional considerations. It does then, CLP is about 10 to 12 minutes northwest of Polaris's current location, so it adds travel time to students who are, and currently families that are providing their own transportation to Polaris. And there's no public bus transportation to CLP. Okay, gonna hand it to Rebecca for scenario B.
So I'll be presenting scenarios B and C, and before I start flashing over to those slides, I just want to provide a little bit of intro to those scenarios. Scenarios B and C present a little bit of an alternative to what might conventionally kind of rise up when you look at some of the data and numbers. They were crafted with a lot of iteration. And really an attempt, kind of referencing back to what Jesse was saying, an attempt at ensuring there was a large variety of options on the table to explore, to gather feedback on, and may not jump out as the most obvious of solutions. And so we present these, again, in that attempt to get as much feedback and open up thinking and open up dialogue as much as possible. Recognizing also, like Jesse was saying, there's some interchangeability. There's some parts and pieces in all of these scenarios that could potentially be mixed and matched in different configurations. So, scenario 2, starting with the east. This one's too long to fit on one slide, so we'll go piece by piece. On the east, it starts with the same change that Jesse mentioned for scenario A1, of balancing the enrollment at Timnath, Bethke, and Bamford Elementaries through boundary adjustments. Under this scenario, Preston Middle School would be consolidated into Kennard Middle School, and a neighborhood boundary would be created for Kennard. So that would turn Kennard into a neighborhood school that feeds directly into Fossil Ridge High School, and Preston would be consolidated. The boundaries would be adjusted to send some students from the new Kennard boundary to Bolts Middle School to balance out the enrollments in that area. Finally, Bamford Elementary School would adjust similarly to scenario A1 to feed into Kennard Middle School and Fossil Ridge High School rather than Timnath Middle High. On the west side of the district, there's some rebalancing through boundaries in the first couple lines. So the boundary between Bowder and Olander elementary schools would be adjusted to better balance out enrollment between those two schools. Similarly, Weber and Blevins Middle School, the boundaries for those schools would be adjusted to reduce some split feeder issues by moving all of the Olander boundary into the Blevins Middle School feeder and balancing enrollment at Weber and Blevins. Lopez Elementary would be consolidated into Johnson, Beatty, and McGraw elementary schools. And this one I want to particularly note, like Jesse mentioned, in this particular area of the community where Lopez, Johnson, McGraw, Olander all exist, and Beatty, there are a lot of different options that could be explored. There's different considerations related to facility condition and age and programs and things like that. But there are a lot of different options in that area based on the space that exists within a lot of those buildings and the current enrollment numbers. Finally, on the west side, Dunn Elementary School would be consolidated into Bennett, Putnam, Irish, and Bowder Elementary Schools. And just to note, Dunn is an IB school, so is Bennett. Irish, that DL there stands for dual language. It's a dual language school. And then the boundary between Putnam and Irish elementary schools would be shifted to send more students to Irish because many students from Dunn could potentially shift into Putnam. I do want to add the asterisk on this point on the west side. Dunn has a significant amount of choice in students. We cannot predict what changing the location or placement of a program like an IB program or core knowledge or any other program that has a lot of choice. We can't predict what choices parents will then make if a school with one of those programs is moved to a different location or consolidated. So it's hard to model numbers around some of those because there's already a lot of parental choice happening in those areas. Then finally, there's some rebalancing of boundaries amongst the middle schools in the central and western part of the district, adjusting the boundaries between Lincoln, Lesher, and Bolts to relieve some pressure at Lesher and better balance enrollment at Lincoln and Bolts in particular. Finally, the alternative schools under this scenario, Polaris and Poudre Community Academy would both move as separate programs into the Preston Middle School building. These programs would not be combined, but there would be space in the school to accommodate two different programs. Similarly, at Blevins Middle School, Poudre Global Academy would be moved into Blevins in a portion of that school that may not need to be utilized under this scenario. So again, those programs would not be combined, but they would exist within the same building at Blevins. The Journey program and Opportunities Unlimited would move to the Centennial building and coexist with Centennial High School in that building. And the transition programs would move into the existing Poudre Global Academy building across from Lesher. So here is this scenario in full and in small print. And I'm happy to flash back to it after I talk a little bit about the benefits and additional considerations. So benefits of scenario B, it does alleviate enrollment pressures on the East Side Elementaries, similarly to scenario 1. It balances the enrollment across several schools through a lot of boundary adjustments. It increases enrollment at some of the underutilized elementaries, middle, and high schools. It may allow for the expansion of Polaris within the Preston Middle School building. It does free up space potentially for early childhood education and other programming. And this scenario would save less than scenario A, but about 22% of the budget size factor adjustment. Some additional considerations. Balancing enrollment without consolidation of schools does not impact the financial bottom line. It does not impact the size factor adjustment in most cases. This does not facilitate a shift to student-based budgeting for PGA or for Polaris, and also does not facilitate a shift away from zero-based budgeting for Centennial or PCA, since all four of those programs, Polaris, PGA, Centennial, and PCA, would remain kind of their own program in a smaller space. This scenario would require renovation of Preston and Blevins to accommodate K-12 programs. And as I mentioned, it's very difficult to predict choice patterns. And under this scenario, with Kennard moving to a neighborhood school and a school with high level of choice being done elementary closing, it would be hard to predict what some of the enrollment patterns might look like following those changes. Does anyone need me to go back to scenario B? Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Rebecca, may I make a statement? I see many, if not all of the board members writing furiously. We have printed copies that are being printed right now of these scenarios for all of you. So once they get here, we'll just deliver them. So just wanted you to be aware of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. You good? Okay. All right. Scenario C looks fairly similar in some ways to scenario B, so I won't dwell on the similarities too much, and I'll highlight the differences. This scenario has some variations on the alternatives on the east side of the district and the alternative schools. The west side remains the same. So under scenario C, the enrollments of Timnath, Bethke, and Bamford would balance again by adjusting boundaries, so that doesn't change. However, Timnath Middle High School would be converted into a high school only, and middle school students would be divided into Preston, Bolts, and Lesher middle schools. Linton Elementary School would change to a 100% choice dual language school without a neighborhood boundary. And current Linton neighborhood students could choice into Linton or be sent to a new neighborhood school, whether that be Zach Elementary or Cruz Elementary, depending on geography. The boundaries between Cruz, Werner, and Bacon would be adjusted to balance enrollments. That's on the east side. For the alternative schools, Poudre Community Academy would move into the Lopez Elementary School building, which would be consolidated under this scenario into other elementary schools. So PCA would exist alone in that building. Poudre Global Academy would move into the Blevins Middle School, similar to in scenario B. The transition programs would move into the Poudre Global Academy, similar to B. The Journey program, Opportunities Unlimited, would move into Centennial. But one difference is that the Polaris Expeditionary Learning School would remain in its current building, and moving back to the student-based budgeting model. So you can see there's just some variations to provide some amount of comparison between scenarios A1, A2, scenario B, and scenario C. Some benefits and considerations here. I'll highlight what is different on this slide. This one does save an estimated 26% of the budget size factor, so between $1.5 and $1.8 million. It would add a dual language program in central Fort Collins that matches some of the demographics in that area. And then under additional considerations, making Timnath Middle High School into just a high school would underutilize that building. While it is at a high capacity right now, removing the middle school piece would result in not only a split feeder from middle school to high school, but would also underutilize that building. Just scanning for some of the key differences. Some of the financial changes are similar to scenario B, and some of the facility renovation needs. Highlighting the last two bullets related to the Linton Elementary option. The students that are currently in the Linton neighborhood boundary may need to travel further to a neighborhood school if they do not choice into Linton dual language, if it was a dual language. And busing is not generally provided for 100% choice schools. So that's a consideration as well. Finally, I want to mention the financial maximization scenario. This is a scenario that was explored by the committee, really with the goal of understanding what could be done to fully maximize cost savings for the district. This is a very aggressive scenario that resulted in closing 13 schools and over a 60% reduction in the budget size factor. You will not see any details of this scenario because the committee does not feel comfortable sharing what this scenario looked like. It was a difficult and painful scenario for those who worked on it, and it almost immediately compromised on many of the guiding principles that were set by the board for the work of the committee. It did not maintain program continuity or access to diversity of programs across the whole district. It caused extensive transportation impacts, and it didn't even need to be modeled to demonstrate that. It was pretty obvious. It reduced access to educational programs for at-risk students in particular, and it created very full schools, which can translate to large class sizes, facility issues, and challenges for teachers, staff, and students. All right, I want to pass it back to Josie to see if she has anything. Nope, before questions for the board. So we will open it up here. We've just presented a lot of information, and Jesse and I will do our best to respond to questions that you may have and provide additional information as you need it.
I changed my mind.
Josie, changed your mind.
Just so you know, once the questions are complete from the board, I will go through next steps and talk about the community questionnaire, how to access that community questionnaire, review listening sessions, review the board listening session, the board listening sessions. So we will talk about next steps after this and show folks where they can access the community questionnaire. So with that, we welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, and what an amazing job y'all did. That is, I mean, the savings is fantastic, and the thoughtfulness that went into this is really commendable. I know these are not final, and so we're not making choices here, but I can see the process that y'all went through and really looking at various options. I know that a number of those were a surprise to me as far as, I hadn't thought of that at all. So thank you so much for that. With that, I don't know if board members want to ask questions. I know that the community session starts tomorrow at 7:30. Is that correct? So I know that there's going to be a lot of iteration starting very early tomorrow morning. And and moving on through the next time that we see you. So with that, does anybody want to go ahead and ask questions now? Yeah, Connor, go ahead.
I just have one really quick one. For the scenarios that are on the east side, specifically Timnath, did the committee speak with the Timnath development director and some of the developers over there pertaining to the developments that are coming online? Jesse, I know you live in the neighborhood. A new house goes up every day. And when I think about the boundaries in my head, I think of 2 or 3 specific communities that could affect these plans in the short term. And I was just wondering if you guys had reached out to them.
Do you want me to jump in? Or? Okay, I'll start and see if Jesse has anything that he'd like to add, since he has direct knowledge of that area. While we had access to some development projection data from flow analytic studies and some information about that. We had some maps, we had some of that type of information. We did not do any outreach as a committee directly to any community development staff in different communities. I will mention my professional role is as the community development director for Larimer County. And we have others on the committee who may have some knowledge of some of those growth patterns, but we did not get to that level of granularity, and that would be really great information to continue to gather as we move from kind of ideation into evaluation.
Awesome. Kevin.
I'm still processing a lot of this, so I'm not going to have fully formed questions yet, but I'd be remiss if I didn't express my gratitude to you all first and foremost. I've done it before when you're not in the room, but now that you are the representatives of the representatives, I want to say thank you. Thank you for stepping up and answering the call to serve your community in this way. This is a truly, as you put it eloquently, a big, how did you put it, Josie? A wicked problem, and so it is. But it is a community problem, and so therefore it deserves a community solution. And so for the people to step up when a lot of times our most precious commodity these days is not resources or money, but it's time. And there's never enough, and it's fleeting. And so what little time you had, you decided to step up in this way, and so I commend you for your leadership and your service. You are not perfect. This is not going to be a perfect scenario, and I acknowledge that. I am not going to be a perfect decision maker at the end of this. I commit to thinking through this problem with you with some humility and some grace, and affording everyone the space they need to kind of process and do this. But what I charge you to do is to stay the course and to thank you for stepping up and serving in this way. And we're going to need you. So I know you've gone through a range of emotions already, frustration, anger, disbelief. And, you know, it comes with the territory of stepping up and saying, I'm going to be a leader in this area. So I just want to express a heartfelt thank you and to continue doing this work. And I look forward to continuing the work with you. I'm going to formulate some questions, but for now, I just wanted to say thank you.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate, thank you guys very much. Thanks for the whole 30-plus member team. 24 hours of meetings, that's brutal. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time on this, and these are really well thought out options. One option that I've been curious about, other people have asked about, and given the data that we're seeing where, you know, for the short term, definitely, you know, enrollment's down, but maybe 5 to 10 years from now it might be up, and maybe we need to bring buildings back out of mothball if that's what happened to them or whatever. Was the scenario, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but was the scenario of just pure boundary changes considered, given that in the past we bus kids in from Wellington all the way into, you know, CLP and further Pruder High School, that type of thing. So those long, I mean, there are kids already doing long commutes. So I know it was kind of said it wasn't acceptable to parents in Timnath, but I think we owe it to the community to just expand on that thought as just boundaries being an option. So was that considered?
You know, we didn't draft up a scenario that included just boundary changes. So, you know, everything's still considered right now, again, because nothing's final. But I think as we were getting into this, getting at the small school factor piece generally involved consolidation, and that was where we were making some actual headway on that number. So at this point, no, we haven't looked at just a scenario with only boundary changes.
Anyone else? Carolyn?
I just wanted to respond to Scott's question, which is that, like, you know, we still have the same infrastructure costs then, right? So we don't get, so, I mean, we have fixed cost, right? So we got to think about that too. In my head, you know, we have fixed costs that we have to think about. And so, yeah, and I did hear a lot of talk about boundary changes for Timnath, actually, quite a few conversations about Timnath having boundary changes. So I think a lot of the scenarios you mentioned did have a lot of talk about boundary changes. It sounds like to me that came up in, well, it did come up in every scenario where there were boundary changes. So I appreciated you guys in that aspect, you know, making those considerations. But just to answer for you, Scott, is for me, the consideration too is about fixed expenses.
Yeah, and I'll just add that our scenario kind of development process was really looking at different areas of the community, developing lots of options around those areas, and then starting to piece some things together rather than thinking, let's develop a whole scenario that has a particular kind of theme to it or goal to it. So that just the way that these scenarios evolved was not to kind of look wholesale at just boundary changes or a consideration like that, but to look at the pieces and parts.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate that, Carolyn. I think that's a good point. When we're just thinking about cost savings, absolutely consolidation has to be a part of it. I think what I'm seeing is down the road, there's talk of maybe we have to build out in Tim because the growth is, as Connor was saying, the growth is extraordinary out there. And so that's going to be an expense that the district's going to have to put up, so the budget's going to have to increase for that. So I'm thinking more that long-term combination of things where shift everything from the east so we have maybe the possibility of not having to build in Timnath, which just given budget constraints and things like that. So maybe we do boundaries instead of that. But that's just a scenario that maybe is not realistic. But it's something I think that's worth at least saying we looked at, because that's going to be, the voters are going to be thinking about that come November, about that particular question. So, but I really, again, I appreciate what you guys have put together so far. It's pretty good, and honestly, I was surprised there weren't more consolidations in these scenarios. One last thing, I'm sorry, I'm back in the time. I know we have a whole nother presentation. This counters what I was just saying, but is the savings, the 1.2 to 1.6, all the way up to, I think, 2.2 million, is that enough? And maybe that's a bigger question for us as an executive team. But is that enough given the initial projections? I don't know. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jess.
On a different note, why, can you explain the Linton changing to 100% choice? Only because that school it does have a lot of dual language students. It serves a unique community in the South Side. I worry that if it becomes only choice, will families continue to have access to that school? Will they know how to choice? Will they have the tools to still access essentially their neighborhood school, since they won't be automatically ushered there?
Can I jump in? Answering that one, I was going the same direction as far as, can you unpack that scenario, that sub-scenario of C, and talk through what the transportation would look like? Because I actually had the exact same concern, and I was going to ask a follow-up about what were you thinking through as far as transportation for the Linton 100% dual, knowing that it's a Title I, and transportation in choice schools is an equity issue that I've talked about before.
Yes, the committee has some of those same questions. This piece was, oh, sorry, let me go here. Okay. So the Linton piece was added into this scenario with the idea that, similar to how Harris Bilingual functions now, where some transportation is provided to native Spanish speakers, that if that type of model could be applied to the other dual language schools or to Linton in this scenario, that could be a more feasible option and a way to expand dual language programming into another area of the community. There are a lot of considerations and trade-offs in everything that we've got in here, and this is a great example of one where we haven't fully evaluated what the impacts would be, and we would love community feedback and hearing feedback from you as we're hearing now that helps inform whether that's something that should be considered further or should it be taken off the table.
I would also say, I think the committee was interested in the fact that there's a wait list at Harris and trying to think about what might the options be. The other obvious choice for a choice dual language would be Irish, but it's geographically in closer proximity. So I think that's not a decision in any particular way, but more of a question of if there were to be another choice dual language school in Fort Collins, what could that look like? And that is part of what this exploration is about. There's a popular program with a wait list, and what might a solution to that look like? And I jumped in on behalf of the steering committee, but
No, thank you for that context. I think I just worry about it being 100% choice, because Irish and Harris, I can't speak anymore, both still have boundaries. So, no? Am I
Harris is
has no
100%
boundaries?
choice.
Irish has boundaries, okay.
Correct.
Okay, so I think I just still worry if it has no boundary, that how do we support the students to make sure they have that continuity of learning? But, thank you.
Can, Jeff, maybe you can tell me the percentage of kids that are bused into Linton, or how many buses we have going in there right now? Just 2?
It's about 2 maximum, and I can check to make sure, but
Yeah. There's a lot of, I believe, and I've learned this just last week, I think they are one of the few boundaries that is exactly 1 square mile. So it's predominantly a walking community. A lot of their students reside in the Harmony Park Village. I don't know if I have that name correct. If I can make a comment specific to Linton, just since we're on topic, if that's okay. And I also want to lead with just gratitude. This is an incredibly challenging task that you're collectively taking on with the other 30-some plus members of this team. I just want to say thank you for being so thoughtful and considerate and having equity be at the forefront of your decision making and how you're grappling with this. Knowing that is a value set of the committee and the district at large, and this impact on Linton and its broader community is very specific to some of our most marginalized students. Has the steering committee thought a little bit around community outreach with that specific school community any differently than the upcoming 7 considerations of listening engagement sessions to flush out the assumptions around that community wanting more dual language offerings? I was just curious about that.
Yes, thank you for that question, and I'll see if Josie has anything to add after I respond. Outreach to the Title I schools in particular has been a topic of conversation among the committee and a point of a lot of feedback from the committee to staff and to IBE in thinking about whether the listening sessions fully capture input from those schools or if there are other mechanisms that can better capture that input. We do have representation on the committee from district staff who work directly with the Title I schools, the family liaisons, as well as in the kind of grant coordination role. And in addition to the listening sessions, we have a questionnaire And we know that principals are doing some outreach at their own schools, and committee members are doing individual outreach as well. We welcome any feedback on additional opportunities to gather that input, but the feedback we've heard from the family liaisons in the Title I schools so far is that what we are planning for outreach is generally sufficient to reach those community members. And again, there's probably always more that we could be doing to reach people.
Go ahead.
So one, thank you for that. That doing that type of thinking on the forefront of this effort is going to be tremendously important. It's an invitation if you need any supports from staff regarding translation services to ensure the questionnaire is available in multiple languages, family lead, whatever you need, just continue to rely upon the staff and myself to be of assistance to you as you named in the role clarity effort in the front end of the presentation. And if I can also ask the committee for consideration as an invitation to think about what program continuity for dual language program could look like in PSD at the middle school level. Because currently that is an area that I think we need investment. And as we're continuing and considering to expand it, continuing to have program continuity at the secondary level, I think could be beneficial to the system at large. So thank you again for your consideration.
Yeah, thanks for the request. And just to be clear, so the materials, the FA, we create a frequently asked questions document. This presentation, the questionnaire will be translated into Spanish and Arabic. We've been working closely with staff, but they've been incredibly supportive. We've been in regular communication saying, is this sufficient? Are we reaching people? Do you have what you need from us to be able to communicate with your families? And so we've been working very closely. We will be having a session on April 4th that will be focused specifically on the Spanish-speaking community and we'll present in Spanish. And have translators present. We'll have our bilingual steering committee members will be present, as well as English monolingual speakers. But we are thinking very carefully and extensively and confirming with your staff and the families that they work with that there are ample opportunities for engagement. The last thing I'll say on that front is that we created a student engagement toolkit as a resource for principals and steering committee members and others. We shared that with the district advisory board to be able to thoughtfully engage students in how they want to participate and what might be useful for them to contribute in this conversation. They're also encouraged to come to the listening sessions and take the questionnaire. So just to give a little bit fuller picture of the extent of the ways that we have been working to get full and complete participation from our community.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, Kevin, go ahead.
All right, I've got another, this is sort of a big, and it can be an open-ended question that I want to circle on because I think it's important, is that we as a board attended a session at the last CASB meeting about Jeffco's consolidation efforts. And so there were some lessons gleaned there and some things that we took away, at least I took away. And one of them is sort of foundational. And I think you touched on it, Josie, in your opening remarks, and I want to come back to that, is that in order to do this work, there really needs to be one universal truth or one set of facts and data that everyone embraces and sort of has alignment upon. From conversations I've had with community members, constituents, other stakeholders, from a recent Colorado article, it seems to be that there is a misalignment or perception of data misalignment that are based presumptions. And so as we go into this work, I want to be mindful of that. And as we go into the listening sessions, that there will be a lot of feedback considering what the data is, what the universal truths are. And I think data is interesting. It can be read and bent in many different ways. But I'm wondering what conversations the steering committee at least has had on sort of those aligning conversations for data. What is our base? What is our truth and our springboard to dictate the urgency and the necessity and the immediacy of the work ahead? And if you can't answer that today, that's fine. But I think that's an important question to raise in public.
That question's been raised on the committee as well. I think as we move forward, we have chosen to trust the data that we're provided with. and that we're getting from flow and from all of the resources that we showed in the slides here. And that's what we're working with. We're trusting that data is accurate. It is, it's guiding our work as we're going forward. So I think, like you said, you have to kind of at some point say, hey, we're going to accept this as a truth, and that this is what this is what the data is telling us. These are resources that we can trust, and that's how we've been operating in terms of developing the scenarios.
Thank you for
one-
asking. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Josie.
Sorry. The one place that did come up that we addressed as a committee at length was that there were some questions about the building utilization calculations. Those had come up as flagged for some committee members. And the remedy to that was that the new district architect reviewed the CAD drawings for every building within the district and confirmed those numbers, came back with modifications. Most of the buildings did not have significant modifications. There were some buildings that there were discrepancies in, and that reconciled the differences that the steering committee members felt for or saw between what they believed to be the building capacity and what we saw on the initial analysis. So other than that, that was a process that the committee went through, and that now the committee feels reconciled by and large with those numbers. We are in the same, I will say we are in the same ballpark. We are very close. We are maybe not on the exact same base, but we might even be within the same diamond, right? Like we're close. and it's close enough for the work that we're doing, right? So one of the considerations there is that we are looking at, 75 to 80% of that very full capacity. So we're already basing building utilization numbers on that, 80% number, which gives enough flexibility that everyone feels comfortable if there's still a little bit of a sense of disparity there. But I did want to call that to light because I know there's been concerns within the community as well, particularly around the building capacity calculations, and those numbers have been verified, and the committee is satisfied with the outcomes of that verification.
Thank you. I think it was important to state. Appreciate that.
I think it's important to state too, is actually a question I had, and I like how that juxtaposes to Scott's question of, is this enough? So we've got the question, of, is it too much? Are we overreaching here? Are we underreaching? And so I think that points to the questions that we have to ask and grapple with. So, and I know, go ahead, Brian, you had something as well.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up about the universal truths, because I really appreciate that level of questioning in terms of how the steering committee is grounding itself in the data. And as we've, and Director Havelda just alluded to, there's different schools of thought around what the future holds in terms of enrollment projections and where things are coming in. But is it a universal thought amongst the steering committee that we have 4,500 to 6,000 empty seats in our district today? Because one of the things that I think we're collectively as a community grappling with is seeing, is this a future-facing problem that we can either avoid or circumvent or think differently about? And I'm just curious if we're having as a universal truth that this problem is almost, there's a level of historical nature to this problem, in my opinion, but I'm curious if there's a shared belief system with the steering committee and what I'm talking about.
Yes, I would say there is a general kind of agreement or understanding within the committee that there are consolidations that need to happen in order to keep some schools or get some schools at a capacity that can better sustain the staff and the programming at those schools. And that is something that we are all aligned on.
Thank you. Carolyn, go ahead.
I just want to say that, I've thought a lot about, like, what does the future hold? And are we making the right decisions? Because I am reminded that before I got on the board, maybe 4 or 5 years before I got on the board in 2014, that the district had contemplated closing 4 elementary schools because they were underutilized by quite a bit. And at that time, the board decided against closing those schools. And what happened was, is 4 or 5 years later, those neighborhoods turned over. But what they had then was a higher birth rate, right, than we have now. And also what they had were falling interest rates where neighborhoods were turning over. And I think we have a kind of a weirdness here now too, where we don't have neighborhoods turning over because there's a lack of houses are expensive. So I think right now we have a different beast too when we look at economics, not just birth rates, that we're going to have to kind of navigate and get our heads wrapped around too, I think. I don't think we've really talked about that, but I think it's at least a small consideration.
Go ahead.
I don't think it's a small consideration. I think that's a large piece of our puzzle. And I actually really appreciate that you said it, because we have had, like, as a district, we've grappled with it before, but this is a different beast than has been here before.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think a lot of people heard this past week or so that there is a large population of older people who are not moving out of their homes. And so that prevents turnover, which prevents younger people from coming in, the higher interest rates. I mean, it is a different beast right now. It's unfortunate for those who would like to move into the area and who have young families, and we would love to have. But it is a very expensive place to live, and that's not just here. Right now, it's very expensive to be a homeowner in general. So, yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just briefly, I was talking to a friend this morning, and I said, I'm so excited for this presentation this evening, and I'm also terrified. And I got to tell you, I'm not terrified anymore. I just thought your work has been thoughtful and professional and creative and presented in a very clear, clean fashion. And I'm just so grateful to the work that you're doing and continuing to do. So thanks. That's it.
All right, go ahead, Brian.
So obviously all 47 of our traditional public schools are dialed into this conversation tonight. Some of them maybe have been dialed in a little bit longer as a result of the conversation that took place in the fall. So I wanted to build off of that and just ask a clarifying question on behalf of the Polaris community. A couple of the scenarios suggest moving Polaris Expeditionary Learning School to a student-based budgeting model. Can you clarify what that means in terms of its current program, knowing it's staying at its current, based on that proposal, staying in its current facility, but what are there any implications to the model of the Expeditionary Learning School as a result of that move?
Let me start that, and then Dave has a microphone, so.
I think Tracy has
Oh, and Tracy as well. I would say an assumption of the committee, and this is not an area where I have much knowledge or expertise at all. An assumption of the committee is Polaris has a very long wait list. If there's the possibility to put Polaris in a space that could accommodate more students in that program, then that could help to shift the budget model that it's under. But I look to Tracy or Dave to weigh in on that.
So we just recently went through looking at budgets for every single school in the district. So the 3 assistant superintendents, we approve, along with the finance department, every budget of every school. And so knowing that this, sort of was being forecast, that Polaris and PGA really needed to reevaluate their models. We charged them to do so for this budgeting cycle. And so Polaris actually did get really pretty darn close to an SBB model for this year going into next year. And so, like, in terms of it disrupting programming, it doesn't appear that it has yet. Now, I'm not, in terms of how the staff experiences it, yes, they had to, let go of some things that were important to them. But I believe it still allowed them to maintain the integrity of the program. So I think it's an important question of, can you still do expeditionary learning as it's intended in an SBB model? And I feel like we got really close this year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, other questions, or we good to, all right. All right, I just want to let everybody know we are going to take a 10-minute break in between. But I just want to end by saying a tremendous thank you. I know that, I think all of us have expressed our gratitude, and we just can't say it enough. This is, as you said, Josie, a wicked problem, and I feel like we have wicked good brains working on this. So, as a Massachusetts person, I can say that, right? Wicked good brains. So yeah, I like Jim. I feel very relieved. I feel like we are in very good hands with y'all. I am excited about what the community has to say, the iterations that will come forth from that, and we will see you again in about a month, right? All right. Again, thank you. Go home, get some sleep. You have a 7:30 presentation, right? Thank you all. All right, so we're going to take a break until 9:23. Yes, I'm sorry.
It wasn't over. It wasn't over.
Sorry. I totally forgot. I am so sorry. Next steps. My bad. Okay. My mistake.
I'm going very fast.
And I just have to say that we're back here at 9:14. My mistake. I led us to recess too early. We have next steps to go.
Okay, and this really won't take long. I don't even have to rush. It just won't take long. Okay, so just to remind everybody for where we are in the process, we're moving into the community listening sessions, as we all know, and the community questionnaire. That's happening through this week, next week, and we have our last session on April 4th. So there are 6 in-person listening sessions. They will all be the exact same content. It'll be a condensed version of what we presented to the board tonight. There's 1 online listening session, again with the same content, but to enable participation, particularly for people who may live long distances away and don't want to come back to town, or just need to stay home to be with their kids, whatever that might be. We do ask that folks watch the video presentation. There will be an edited version before, either attend a listening session or watch the edited version of tonight's presentation before taking the questionnaire, just so that we all have that baseline understanding and context. And then in April and early May, we're going to do scenario refinement and develop recommendations for the board. So we will bring the committee back together. They have elected to do additional work sessions to make sure that that work is done well and done right. There are ad hoc committees that are working together with facilitation, so that is not like unsupervised time where people are working in secret coalitions. Everybody is working to be very transparent with one another, but also doing some divide and conquer, because as you know, working through every detail with 37 people just turns out to be a lot. So we will synthesize and bring the insights from the listening sessions and the questionnaire into the whole group context with some analysis. We will then refine scenarios that will be presented to the board via a recommendations report. Then there's a board listening session on 4/16. I have a schedule for that. And then we'll give a presentation to the board of directors in May. So the steering committee will present. We have 4 liaisons, so that they didn't all have to be at all the meetings. So that's why Amy and Micah weren't here tonight. It wasn't their day to be on duty, but they will come for other meetings. And then we will present recommendations to the board on 5/28. There's a second board listening session for the community before a decision is made. So everyone will see the final scenarios that are present via the recommendation session in May. And then you all will have a final chance to hear from the community before making your decision on 6/11. So there's some nice touch points and iterations that are going to happen through that. These are just the dates. These are published online. I don't intend to go through them, but as mentioned, we will be meeting at Timnath Middle High tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. And then we also have a session tomorrow evening from 6 to 8 p.m. at Fort Collins. The board listening sessions, these are new additions. This did go out in whole district-wide communications, but thank you for graciously allowing more time for public comment by opening up to these listening sessions. I think the timing of them is also really nicely placed. I'm not sure, I think that might have been a happy accident, but I think it works out really, really well. Those board listening sessions. And then this is a link to the community questionnaire. It will not be live until tomorrow. We do want to get the edited version up for the recording, again, trying to get everybody to watch that. But the questionnaire will be released tomorrow, and it'll be open through April 5th at 10 a.m. So just so that everyone's clear about when that happens, everyone is encouraged to participate. Teachers, parents, students. You're also only allowed to participate once, and you can only hit the submit button once. So make sure you know what you want to say and how you feel before you hit the button. You can keep it open as long as you want. You can return to an unfinished survey. It's pretty short. We tried to keep it nice and concise, but also to the point. And so just so you know, you can't go back once you've submitted it. Just want everybody to hear that. And that's all. So thank you for that little bit. Yeah.
Just on process for the listening sessions,
Yep.
is there like an order or sign up? Is there a moderator? Like, how's that going to, I'm sure some people in the community are wondering, like, how am I going to participate? How's that look?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Okay.
Lauren, do we know at this point?
So to answer the question, there is no sign up. They're open to everyone. So anyone who would like to come, please come to the listening sessions or watch the video, fill out the questionnaire online. And then in terms of how they'll be structured, we'll do a brief version of this presentation to kick things off and then table discussions thereafter.
Sorry, Lauren, the question was about the board listening sessions.
Board listening sessions also totally open to the public. Anyone can come.
No,
And
it was
there will be a
actually, it was for the first listening sessions, but that's fine.
Oh, for the sorry.
Yeah, it was for the
I
community.
misunderstood the
No, you're
question.
okay. It was a
Okay,
poorly phrased question.
so say it again.
I was just curious as the format about getting community engagement and having the listening sessions, giving the community the opportunity to speak
Yes.
at these as well.
Okay, so yes, I will explain that specifically. So the way that works is I will give a brief presentation at the beginning of each listening session to assure that we're all kind of on the same page and present again, the condensed version. And then steering committee members will host table conversations. There is a discussion guide for them. People are welcome to say whatever they care to say. It's not a mandatory discussion guide, it's a guide. And then there is a reporting form that the table hosts will report back their key learnings and understandings, as well as individuals will be able to take the questionnaire. So steering committee members will be there to listen to the comments from the community at the listening sessions. And then at the board listening sessions, my understanding is that those will be essentially an open mic with a timer, and the board will be able to listen to the community comment, but it allows everyone a chance to speak directly their voice to the board.
Thank you.
Yep.
Maybe one more process question. I think I heard you say the steering committee listening sessions are not live streamed.
Correct.
Okay.
They will not be live streamed.
It was probably me, but I misunderstood because I was planning on attending tomorrow's live stream. So maybe just if we could check the website and just be sure that it's very clear that they're not live streamed, because there's something that says click here for live stream, and so just make sure of that to our communications folks, I guess. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I think that is now it. I am so sorry about that. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. It is 9:21 p.m. on Tuesday, March 19th, and we will be back here at 9:31. Thank you.